In this video, we're going to talk about how to get started using provider maps on the BitScoop API Toolbox and how to use these provider maps to work with data providers. So by the end of this intro, you'll know how to set up a very basic provider map and then use it to configure dynamically provisioned callable endpoints that can then forward requests to a data provider. So before we go any further, it's probably most important to understand what we consider a data provider. Really, any service or microservice that's available over standard HTTP can be considered a data provider and should work well with the BitScoop API Toolbox. So some examples might be the Facebook API, a Google API, Stripe, or Wikipedia. Of course, which one of these is most important to you obviously depends on what's most important to your business or your application. And you might be working with one data provider or you might be working with many. But the important takeaway here is that you can streamline and simplify your data workflows by using the BitScoop API Toolbox. So what we're going to be doing is creating a simple provider map that will integrate with a sample data provider that we've put together for the purposes of this demo. So what you can see here is a provider map that we've already created. If we open it up and look at the source code really quickly, you can see that it doesn't really do very much that's interesting. All it does is specify the version of the specification that it subscribes to, and that is the BitScoop API Toolbox specification for a provider map. And it says which URL that it maps to. Remember, we're running a data provider on our local system so that we're going to be able to deeply inspect the request that the API Toolbox makes. Over on our other screen over here, we have our Postman application. And what this is going to let us do is make requests and visualize the results. It's just a tool that you can download. We use it internally here at BitScoop a lot. And here, over in the console, we have our data provider that's running on localhost port 5858. So before we go any further, let's get an idea of what sort of data is available on our sample data provider. So what we're going to do is open up our collections over here on Postman, and we're going to send a request directly to our data provider. You can see here that the request that's going to be sent is to localhost 5858/posts. So if we go ahead and send this right now, you can see this is the data that's available. It's just filler data. And you can see over here the request that was inbound to our data provider. So all the headers, the parameters, and the body are visible right there, and the path you can see right here. Obviously, what we haven't covered so far is how we configure a provider map to forward requests to a data provider and then return the result. We're going to do that now, but before we do, let's take a second to understand the different routes that are going to be dynamically provisioned for any given endpoint. The collection route, as you can see, is directly callable without an identifier. An identifier can be considered any value you typically pass into an API that allows you to select a single item versus the group that it might belong to. So if we wanted the list of all posts, for instance, we'd be mapping the collection route to the appropriate endpoint on our data provider. Conversely, the single route includes an identifier that we can use to dynamically calculate outbound values, such as the path or query parameters, so on and so forth, that let you select that single item. We might also be interested in defining custom actions to account for APIs that don't strictly use HTTP verbs to express behavior. So a custom action can essentially be thought of as a regular endpoint with a default single or default collection route disabled. Let's go ahead and take another look at our sample data provider. What we've done already is gone ahead and added an endpoint specification just to save some time, but we can dive into this and start to take a look. So you can see here that we have an endpoint called posts. The default outbound route, so the route that's going to be used to query the data provider, is going to be /posts. If we're requesting the single route, so that would be /post/1 on our BitScoop API Toolbox, what's going to happen is that outbound route is going to be overridden by /post/the identifier. The identifier, such as 1, 2, 3, is the one that's passed into the BitScoop API Toolbox and is used to dynamically calculate the outbound route right here. So let's go ahead and make a few sample requests so we can see what's going on. So here you can see we've already set a collection up that includes this request. So this is a request to our particular provider map on the BitScoop API Toolbox. Remember from the previous slide that in brackets we had ID, and that's going to be the ID of the data of the provider map. And then the endpoint name, which we've already created before, which is posts. So if we send this, it's going to get a list of all of our posts through the data provider. So you can see the request that's gone to the data provider /posts right here, and the data that returns back from that. If we wanted to get a single post, then all we need to do is add the /1, which is the identifier, to the end of that request. We go ahead and send this, and you can see the single post with an ID of 1 that we get back. And you can see the request that was made to the data provider /post/1. And remember that 1 right here is dynamically evaluated based on this 1 right here. So let's go ahead and add our custom action just so we can round this out. What happens if we wanted to add a custom action like add invoice that uses the post verb? Well, what we can do is just add it right here. I've just added this to my clipboard so you don't have to watch me type. But you can see we have another endpoint, add invoice. It's going to specify the verb post, and it's going to offset the actual specification inside that verb post right here. We're going to make sure that we're sending a post request to the data provider, and we're mapping the route /invoices. And then we want to actually disable the single route, just so we can basically say, if you request /add invoice /1, that doesn't really make any sense, and we want that to be disabled. So let's go ahead and save this, and this automatically updates. So we can go back over to our request collections, and we'll do the add invoice, send a post request to that endpoint. And you can see here that it returns the value OK. And then there's the request. For some reason, it took a little bit of time to log, but that's all right. So that'll about wrap up our demo. Hopefully now you understand some of the basics of working with provider maps and how to link them up with data providers. Be sure to check out our other videos and resources if you're interested in learning more about some other advanced API Toolbox features that we have. If you instead learn best from real-world examples, or you want to see how to start to model popular data providers, we wanted to point you towards our GitHub repository that has some sample provider maps for you to use. If you run into any issues or you have any questions, be sure to let us know and we'll do what we can to help you out. Aside from that, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.